The following is part one of a Barefoot Lawyer Reports interview with Reggie Littlejohn. To listen to the other parts, please check the link in the description.
Dear friends, I would like to say a few words about Reggie Littlejohn. I was persecuted because I exposed the violence and brutality of the Chinese Communist Party's one-child policy. For over 7 years, I was held in prison and under house arrest. I didn't know what was going on outside, and no one could speak to me from outside. During that time, Reggie Littlejohn began a campaign to try to free me. I didn't know this until much later. She organized online campaigns and collected over 11,000 signatures for a petition. She spoke in the U.S. Congress and at the European Parliament about my case. I'm so grateful for her support and for her tireless work for human rights in China. I wish her many more years of success for her foundation. Thank you, Reggie. Thank you, my friend.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Barefoot Lawyer Reports on China. My name is Will Deathridge, the producer, and joining me today is a very special guest, Reggie Littlejohn. Reggie, could you introduce yourself, who you are, and we can just launch right away into how you know Guangcheng and your role in his incredible story.
So I am the founder and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, and I'm an attorney. And as an attorney, I represented a Chinese refugee in her case for political asylum in the mid-90s, who had been forcibly sterilized, meaning that she had been taken out of her home, dragged out, and held down to a table, and they performed a tubal ligation on her, which is abdominal surgery without anesthesia. She got an infection and she was basically permanently disabled at the time that I represented her. So that's when I learned that the Chinese propaganda that the one-child policy was voluntary was actually just a lie, and that it is enforced through forced abortion, forced sterilization, and infanticide. So I left the practice of law, and there's a longer story to that as well. But actually, I'll just mention that I got really, really sick at the end of my time as an attorney. I had to leave on a medical leave of absence, and I was actually disabled for like 5 years.
Oh, wow.
During which time I was just praying to God, if you let me live, if I survive, please make my life worth living. And I also said, please break my heart for whatever breaks your heart. So he broke my heart for the people like this woman who are victims of the one-child policy. And I founded the organization Women's Rights Without Frontiers, the first goal of which was to stop forced abortion under China's one-child policy. And during the time that I was sick, I became aware of Chen Guangcheng, just in the research that I was doing on the one-child policy. And my heart just broke for him, that he was this, heroic, blind activist that had sacrificed everything to be able to bring to the attention of the world the fact that the one-child policy was enforced through forced abortion, forced sterilization, and was suffering horrifically for it in jail. At the time I found out about him, he was still in jail.
What year?
Oh gosh, this must have been, I can't even remember the exact years. Remember, I was just coming out of an illness when I was doing this, but I would think it was in the 2009 time frame.
Yeah.
something like that. So I launched basically a worldwide campaign to free him. And we did many things in that campaign, but I testified at the European Parliament, the British Parliament, the Irish Parliament, the Canadian Parliament, and I don't know how many times before Congress about his situation and advocating for his freedom. And many, many times on Voice of America. I can't even remember how many times I was on Voice of America, which is always a thrill because when you're on Voice of America, or at least at that time, when you were on Voice of America, you are getting over the Chinese firewall and speaking directly to the Chinese people.
Yeah.
But we produced a video, a 3-minute video of Chen Guangcheng that was, I think, possibly the most powerful tool in raising awareness internationally for his case. So I hope that you can play that video here, maybe, because that video really shows his heroism and also my determination to not stop until he's free. And that we did an English version and a Chinese version. So I was working with somebody inside of China whose English pen name is Pearl. And when she was doing actions inside of China for Chen Guangcheng, she would send out that video over and over again, to incite people or to inspire people to go visit him, which of course, when people visited him, they would get beaten up and, dragged off. So it was a big deal to try to visit him. So that's how I got started with this work.
Yeah. Well, one of the themes of this podcast, and Guangcheng loves at the end of every segment, every week when he covers a human rights abuse, to state how Americans can help people in communist China. So, you launched a campaign that made international headlines that resulted in his freedom. How did that look like, especially in the early days of it? Like I said, we like to educate people on, maybe it can inspire others to get involved in similar ways with different stories like Guangcheng's.
It's kind of crazy how this started for me because it was completely unintentional. It's kind of so this is sort of like God just calling me to this. So what happened basically, and I'll just tell it quickly, is I was very sick, like I said. But I was obsessed with just putting together what was going on with the one-child policy. Like there was no coherent analysis of it. So anyway, I got myself onto just about every single Chinese human rights email list that there is, including one of a certain organization, which I will not name, that said, "Hey, we're having this symposium at the European Parliament. Here's our list of experts. Here are a list of issues." And I emailed the president of the organization, who's now a friend of mine, but I emailed him saying, "Well, what about the one-child policy? How come nobody's talking about the one-child policy?" And he emailed me back saying, "Well, don't you realize, my dear, that the one-child policy is a thing of the past and everything's voluntary?" I said, "Oh, really?" And that's when my sort of lawyerly instincts kicked in. It's like, well, what about this document? What about this document? What about this document? What about this document? So finally he said, "I surrender, Ms. Littlejohn. I see that the one-child policy is enforced coercively. Will you be our expert and will you come to Brussels at our expense and testify about the one-child policy?" That's how it started. Is that crazy? But it's crazy. It's like the last thing I thought was going to happen from my little email. I mean, I remember sitting in my little red pajamas and practically falling out of my chair getting invited. So I started out, testifying at the European Parliament, and that testimony is now in a book. You can get it on Amazon. And I testified about Chen Guangcheng. So then I went back to my little sick bed and I thought, okay, well, that was, amazing, but it was also exhausting and I'm tired and, I'm not going to do this anymore. And then all of a sudden, just the media was just, everybody wanted to know my opinion about anything that had to do with the one-child policy. And so I said, well, I guess this is a thing. Maybe this is God's answer to my prayer. That to make my life worth living. And so then I just followed it and became like this, world expert without ever having the intention of doing so. So, I mean, I don't know how you replicate that. I mean, for people who want to get
your
involved.
persistence,
Yeah, but the persistence has to come from God, because I had no strength.
Right.
God will strengthen you. If He
Mm-hmm.
wants you to do something, He will provide the strength and the courage and the connections and the money for you to do it. But I mean, I was in a position of complete submission to the Lord. I mean, I didn't know whether I was going to live or whether I was going to die. And I was just like, okay, Lord, my life is in your hands. Please take me and make me, make my life worth living. May I glorify you with my life. And, it wasn't like, Lord, I want to do this. Please bless what I want to do. It was like, I'm yours. Do with me what you will. And that's what He's chosen to do with me.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons that the Communist Party is so afraid of things like faith, things like religion and all, the strength that we draw, from those sources, especially in the Catholic tradition, the strength we draw from God like that, it can overcome any earthly authority, right? So it's wonderful to hear that that's what motivated you, something that, that's how you fight the Communist Party and, governments like that. The Barefoot Lawyer Reports on China is proud to announce the publication of a report on Confucius Institutes and the Chinese Communist Party's infiltration of American academic institutions. To read the report, which was published by the Catholic University of America's Center for Human Rights, please go to catholic.edu/chr and visit our Research and Analyses page.